In a Palo Alto mansion, a 72-year-old grandmother in a vibrant purple dress was about to overhear words that would shatter her world. What started as her granddaughter's birthday party took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her son's cruel whisper. Isabelle Wilson wasn't your typical retiring grandmother. For decades, she had sacrificed everything after immigrating from Taiwan, known for her quiet strength and endless accommodation. When she overheard David tell Emma, "Grandma is embarrassing us," she had no idea this moment would ignite a revolution. What began as devastating rejection would become radical self-discovery that transformed her entire family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The purple dress had been a mistake. Isabelle Wilson realized this the moment she stepped through David's front door, watching her son's face tighten almost imperceptibly as he took in her appearance. She'd chosen the vibrant shade deliberately, tired of the beige and gray that had become her uniform over the years. But now, surrounded by the carefully curated neutrals of his Palo Alto home, she felt like a splash of paint on a pristine canvas. "Happy birthday, Emma," she said, pressing a wrapped package into her granddaughter's hands. The gift was wrapped in recycled paper she'd decorated herself with watercolor flowers, another choice that suddenly felt foolish against the backdrop of expensive gift bags clustered on the marble-topped console. Emma's face lit up with genuine delight. "Grandma, I love your dress. You look amazing." The 16-year-old's enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment, Isabelle felt her confidence return. At least one person in this family still saw her as more than an embarrassment to be managed. "Thank you, sweetheart. I thought it was time for a change." She smoothed the fabric over her hips, remembering the saleswoman's surprise when she'd requested something colorful. "Most women your age prefer something more subdued," she'd said. Isabelle had bought the purple dress anyway, along with matching shoes that made her feel like she was walking on air. David appeared at her elbow, his smile polished and professional. "Mom, let me introduce you to some colleagues." His hand on her back was gentle but firm, guiding her toward a cluster of men in expensive casual wear. Tech executives, she realized, recognizing the uniform of pressed jeans and button-down shirts that cost more than she used to make in a week at the dry cleaner. "This is my mother, Isabelle," David said, his voice carrying that careful tone she'd learned to recognize, the one that meant he was performing for an audience. "She's recently retired." The men smiled politely, the kind of smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Isabelle had seen those looks before, the way people's attention slid past her as if she were furniture. At 72, she'd become invisible in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance and everything to do with her age. "What line of work were you in?" asked one of them. "Tom." She thought his name was. David had mentioned him before, spoke of him with the reverence reserved for those who held power over career advancement. "I was a seamstress," Isabelle said simply. "Worked at Chen's Alterations for 30 years. She watched David's jaw tighten slightly. He preferred when she said she'd been in textiles or worked in fashion. The truth was too common, too ordinary for his carefully constructed image. "That's wonderful," Tom said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "Very traditional." The conversation began to flow around her, as it always did. Stock options and product launches. The rhythm of Silicon Valley success. Isabelle found herself studying the men's faces, remembering when David had been small and would tell her everything, his fears about starting school, his dreams of becoming an astronaut, his worry that she worked too hard. "You know," she said during a lull, "David used to be terrified of butterflies when he was little." The group turned to her with polite attention. David's expression shifted to something between panic and resignation. "He was about 5, Isabelle continued, warming to the memory. "We were at the park, and this beautiful monarch landed on his sandwich. He screamed so loud that half the mothers there thought someone was kidnapping him." She laughed, the sound genuine and warm. He hid behind my legs for 20 minutes, convinced it was going to follow him home. The men chuckled, and Tom looked at David with new interest. I can't imagine you being afraid of anything, Chen. You're the most fearless negotiator I know. We all have our childhood fears, David said, his voice tight. Mom, maybe we should. Oh, but that's not the best part, Isabelle interrupted, caught up in the joy of remembering when her son had been small and vulnerable and hers. The next week, he made me buy him a book about butterflies. He was determined to understand them, to conquer his fear. He spent the whole summer studying them, and by August, he was trying to catch them in mason jars. She could see David's discomfort radiating from him like heat, but she pressed on. These stories were all she had left of the boy he'd been before he'd learned to be ashamed of her. He was so serious about it, so methodical. Even then, you could see the mind that would make him successful. He approached that fear like a project to be solved. She looked at her son with pride. That's when I knew he'd be able to handle anything life threw at him. The men were smiling now, genuine smiles that transformed their faces. That's actually pretty impressive for a 5-year-old, one of them said. Most kids would have just avoided parks for the rest of the summer. David's always been special, Isabelle said simply. She excused herself to use the bathroom, navigating through the house that still felt foreign to her despite her many visits. Everything was so clean, so perfect. Like a magazine spread rather than a home where a family lived. She found herself thinking of their old apartment, with its mismatched furniture and David's artwork covering the refrigerator. That had been a home. On her way back, she detoured through the kitchen to find a glass of water. The voices from the living room carried clearly through the open doorway, and she paused when she heard her name. Your mom seems sweet, Tom was saying. She is, David replied, but there was something in his tone that made Isabelle step closer to the doorway. She doesn't really understand how things work here. The expectations. What do you mean? David's voice dropped, but Isabelle could still hear every word. She immigrated from Taiwan when she was young, worked in a dry cleaner her whole life. She doesn't really get the professional scene, you know? Sometimes she says things that are... Isabelle held her breath. That are what? Tom pressed. Just inappropriate for the setting. She means well, but she doesn't have the social awareness for these kinds of gatherings. The words hit her like a physical blow. Social awareness. As if her decades of navigating American culture, of raising a son alone in a foreign country, of building a life from nothing, counted for nothing because she didn't understand the unspoken rules of Silicon Valley networking. She heard Emma's voice then, bright and clear. Dad, Grandma's stories are funny, everyone was laughing. Emma, honey, David's voice was patient but firm. You don't understand. Grandma is embarrassing us. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Embarrassing us. Not just him, but all of them. The family unit that she'd sacrificed everything to build, that she'd sewn late into the night to support, that she'd held together with her own hands and will and endless love. Isabelle stepped back from the doorway, her hand finding the cool granite countertop for support. The kitchen blurred around her as tears she hadn't shed in years threatened to fall. She'd known David was ashamed of her, the way he introduced her, the careful editing of her stories, the subtle corrections to her grammar. But hearing it stated so baldly, so casually to her granddaughter. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, calling on reserves of strength she'd built over decades of disappointment and resilience. She would not cry. Not here, not now. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and walked back into the living room. The conversation had moved on to safer topics, market projections, and quarterly reports. David looked up as she approached, his expression shifting to something that might have been guilt. Mom, there you are. Are you enjoying the party? It's lovely, she said, her voice steady. Emma, sweetheart, thank you for inviting me. I hope you love your gift. I haven't opened it yet, Emma said, holding up the watercolor-wrapped package. I was saving it for when everyone gets here. Actually, Isabelle said, smoothing her purple dress one final time. "I think I need to head home. I have an early morning tomorrow." "You don't have to go," Lisa said, appearing at her elbow. "The party's just getting started." "I know, dear. But I'm tired." The word carried weight she hoped they couldn't hear. Not physically tired, though she was. Soul tired. Tired of shrinking herself to fit their expectations. Tired of being the embarrassment they had to manage. She said her goodbyes with unusual formality, kissing Sophie's forehead and hugging Emma a little longer than usual. David walked her to the door, his hand hovering near her elbow in a gesture that felt more like duty than affection. "Drive safely, Mom. Text me when you get home." "I will." She paused at the threshold, looking back at the party that continued without her. "David?" "Yeah." She wanted to say so many things. That she'd worked 2 jobs to pay for his computer camp when he was 12. That she'd learned English by watching soap operas so she could help him with his homework. That she'd been proud of him every single day of his life, even when he'd stopped being proud of her. Instead, she smiled. "Happy birthday to Emma. She's becoming a wonderful young woman." "She is," he agreed, his voice softening slightly. "Thanks for coming, Mom." She nodded and walked to her car, her back straight and her head high. But as she drove through the perfectly manicured streets of Palo Alto, past the houses that cost more than she'd made in a lifetime, she felt something shifting inside her chest. The careful politeness she'd cultivated, the endless accommodation of others' comfort, the constant apologizing for taking up space, it was all cracking apart like old plaster. "Embarrassing us." The words echoed in her mind as she pulled into her apartment complex, as she climbed the stairs to her small but tidy home, as she hung the purple dress in her closet next to the rows of beige and gray. For 72 years, she'd been what others needed her to be: the dutiful daughter, the devoted wife, the selfless mother, the invisible old woman. She'd shrunk herself down to fit their expectations, made herself smaller and quieter and more palatable. But as she sat in her living room, still in her slip and stockings, staring at the framed photo of David's college graduation, she realized something had changed. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh, but underneath it was something else. Something that felt dangerous and exhilarating and long overdue. She was done being embarrassed by who she was. If they found her embarrassing, perhaps it was time to give them something to really be embarrassed about. The thought should have scared her. Instead, for the first time in years, Isabelle Wilson smiled. The mirror in Isabelle's bathroom had reflected the same face for 15 years. Silver hair pulled back in a sensible bun, neutral lipstick, reading glasses perched on her nose. But this morning, 2 weeks after Emma's birthday party, the woman staring back at her looked like a stranger. Purple streaks wound through her newly shortened hair like ribbons of defiance. The salon had been packed with women half her age, and when she'd shown them the photo she'd torn from a magazine, the stylist had actually asked if she was sure. "It's quite bold," the young woman had said, her tone suggesting that bold was the last thing a 72-year-old should aspire to be. "I'm sure," Isabelle had replied, and meant it. Now, running her fingers through hair that caught the light like silver silk, she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Excitement about her own reflection. The woman in the mirror looked alive, awake, unapologetic. She looked like someone who might have opinions, who might take up space in a room, who might not care if her presence made others uncomfortable. She'd been awake since 5, unable to sleep through the anticipation of what she was about to do. The pottery class registration had been sitting on her kitchen table for 3 days, filled out but not yet mailed. Today, she would drop it off in person. The drive to the Palo Alto Community Center took her through neighborhoods she'd cleaned houses in during David's childhood, back when every dollar had mattered and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. She remembered trudging up these same sidewalks with her cleaning supplies, invisible to the families whose lives she'd helped maintain. Now she parked in the visitor lot and walked through the front door like she belonged there. The community center buzzed with morning activity. Yoga classes, senior aerobics, book clubs, all the acceptable ways for women her age to pass time. But she bypassed the familiar activities and headed straight for the arts wing, where hand-painted signs pointed toward beginner pottery, express yourself in clay. The classroom smelled of earth and possibility. Pottery wheels sat in neat rows, waiting for hands that knew what they were doing. Isabelle had never touched clay in her life, had never made anything that wasn't strictly functional. But that, she realized, was exactly the point. "You must be Isabelle," said a woman with paint-stained fingers and a warm smile. "I'm Sarah, the instructor. Welcome to pottery." "Thank you for letting me join mid-session," Isabelle said, suddenly aware of how her purple-streaked hair stood out among the other students, mostly women in their 50s and 60s, all with the careful composure of people who'd never colored outside the lines. "Art doesn't follow calendars," Sarah replied. "And honestly, some of our best discoveries happen when we stop worrying about doing things the right way." The lesson began with centering clay on the wheel, a process that required strength and patience in equal measure. Isabelle's first attempts were disasters, wobbly, lopsided things that collapsed under their own weight. But instead of frustration, she felt something unexpected: joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy at the mess she was making, at the clay under her fingernails, at the complete absence of anyone's expectations but her own. "Don't fight the clay," Sarah advised, her hands guiding Isabelle's. "Let it teach you what it wants to become." By the end of the 2-hour session, Isabelle had created something that barely resembled a bowl. It was asymmetrical, with fingerprints pressed into the sides like abstract art. It was imperfect, unprofessional, and absolutely beautiful in its honest awkwardness. "I love it," she announced to the room, holding up her creation with the pride of a child showing off a drawing. "It's terrible, and I love it." The other students laughed, but not unkindly. They understood the liberation of creating something purely for the joy of it, without the weight of judgment or the pressure of perfection. Walking to her car, Isabelle felt lighter than she had in years. The bowl sat carefully wrapped in her passenger seat, a tangible reminder that she could still learn, still grow, still surprise herself. She was 72 years old, and she'd just discovered that clay responded to her touch, that her hands could shape something from nothing. The knock on her door came at 3 o'clock, just as she was arranging her new art supplies on the kitchen table. She'd stopped at the craft store after pottery class, drawn by displays of paints and brushes like a child in a candy store. The salesperson had tried to steer her toward senior-friendly activities, large print crosswords, simple needlework kits. Instead, she'd bought watercolors, acrylic paints, and a set of canvases that would require her to learn everything from scratch. "Isabelle?" Mrs. Rodriguez's voice carried through the door, tinged with concern. "Are you all right? I saw your car pull in and, well, I wanted to check on you." Isabelle opened the door to find her neighbor holding a covered dish and wearing the expression of someone preparing to deliver bad news. Carmen Rodriguez had been her closest friend for 15 years, ever since she'd moved into the apartment complex. They'd shared coffee and gossip, watched each other's mail during vacations, and provided the kind of steady, uncomplicated friendship that made daily life bearable. "Carmen, come in," Isabelle said, stepping aside. "I'm fine." "Better than fine, actually." Mrs. Rodriguez entered cautiously, her eyes taking in the art supplies spread across the table, the pottery bowl drying on the counter, and most notably, Isabelle's transformed appearance. Her expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Isabelle, what have you done to your hair?" "I had it styled," Isabelle replied, running her hand through the purple-streaked silver. "Do you like it?" Mrs. Rodriguez set down her dish, enchiladas from the smell, and clasped her hands together. "Oh, honey, what's brought this on? Are you feeling all right? This isn't like you." "That's the point," Isabelle said, filling the kettle for tea. "I'm tired of being like me. The old me, anyway." She told Carmen about the pottery class, about the art supplies, about the way she'd felt when she'd seen herself in the salon mirror. But she didn't mention Emma's birthday party, didn't repeat David's words. Some wounds were too fresh to share, even with a friend. "I'm worried about you," Mrs. Rodriguez said finally. "This is so sudden, so dramatic. People our age, we don't just change everything overnight. What will people think?" I don't care what people think, Isabelle said, and the words felt revolutionary on her tongue. I've spent my entire life caring what people think. I dressed the way they expected, spoke the way they wanted, made myself smaller and quieter and more convenient. And where has it gotten me? Mrs. Rodriguez looked genuinely distressed. It's gotten you respect, dignity. You're a lady, Isabelle. You don't need to draw attention to yourself like this. Why not? The question came out sharper than Isabelle intended. Why don't I deserve attention? Why is it undignified for me to be visible? Because that's not how women our age behave, Mrs. Rodriguez replied. We've earned the right to be comfortable, to be settled. We don't need to prove anything to anyone. Isabelle sat down across from her friend, recognizing the fear in her voice. It was the same fear she'd carried for decades. The terror of being too much, too loud, too present. The fear of taking up space in a world that preferred invisible women. Carmen, when was the last time you did something just because you wanted to? Not because it was expected, not because it was practical, but because it made you happy. Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I suppose I'm happy enough with my routines. Are you? Are you really? The question hung between them like a challenge. Mrs. Rodriguez had been widowed for 8 years, had raised 3 children who rarely called, had spent her retirement years maintaining the same careful patterns that had defined her marriage. She volunteered at the church, played bingo on Thursdays, watched the same television shows every night. It was a life of quiet contentment, the kind that looked peaceful from the outside. I think, Mrs. Rodriguez said slowly, that happiness is a luxury for young people. At our age, we should be grateful for peace. But what if I don't want peace? Isabelle asked. What if I want to make noise? What if I want to be inconvenient and inappropriate and embarrassing? The last word slipped out before she could stop it, carrying with it all the hurt and anger she'd been holding inside. Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes widened with understanding. Oh, honey, what happened? And finally, Isabelle told her. About David's words, about the party, about the way she'd felt invisible and disposable in her own family. Mrs. Rodriguez listened without judgment, her expression growing sadder with each detail. I'm so sorry, she said when Isabelle finished. David was wrong to say that. But sweetheart, this isn't the way to handle it. This dramatic change, this rebellion, it's only going to make things worse. Maybe, Isabelle said, but at least I'll be making things worse as myself. As the person I actually am, not the person I thought I was supposed to be. She showed Mrs. Rodriguez the pottery bowl, explaining how it had felt to create something with her hands, to make something that served no purpose, except to exist. She talked about the colors she wanted to paint, the books she wanted to read, the places she wanted to visit. With each confession, she felt the careful walls she'd built around her desires crumbling. I want to learn to dance, she said suddenly. I want to take a cooking class and make food that's messy and delicious. I want to wear bright colors and laugh too loud and tell stories that make people uncomfortable. I want to be the woman I was before I learned to be ashamed of her. Mrs. Rodriguez looked overwhelmed. But what will your family think? What will the neighbors say? I don't know, Isabelle admitted, but I'm done letting their opinions decide how I live my life. I'm 72 years old, Carmen. If I don't start living for myself now, when will I? After Mrs. Rodriguez left, still worried, still disapproving, but unable to argue with the light in Isabelle's eyes, Isabelle sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad and began to write. At the top of the page she wrote, "Things I want to do before I die." The list grew quickly. Learn to paint landscapes. Take a pottery class. Check. Get a tattoo. Go dancing. Travel somewhere I've never been. Learn to drive a motorcycle. Take a cooking class. Write a letter to the editor. Wear red lipstick. Sing karaoke. Learn to speak Spanish properly. Take a photography class. Go to a rock concert. Learn to garden. Write my own story. Some items were practical, others fantastical. But each one represented a piece of herself she'd buried over the years. A dream she'd dismissed as inappropriate or impossible, or simply too late. The phone rang just as she was adding "learn to use a computer" to the list. David's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment she considered not answering, but curiosity won out. Hi, David. Mom, I just talked to Mrs. Rodriguez. She's worried about you. She said you've changed your hair? Isabelle could hear the careful concern in his voice, the same tone he'd used when she'd needed help with her taxes, or had been late returning his calls, the tone that said he was managing a problem. I have. Do you like it? I haven't seen it yet. Mrs. Rodriguez said it's quite dramatic. It is. There was a pause. Mom, are you feeling okay? This seems very sudden. I'm feeling wonderful, she said, and meant it. I'm feeling like myself for the first time in years. That's great, Mom, but maybe we should talk about this. Maybe you should talk to someone. I am talking to someone. I'm talking to you. Another pause. I meant someone professional. Someone who could help you process whatever this is. The suggestion hit her like a slap. He thought she was having a breakdown, that her newfound joy was a symptom of mental illness rather than mental health. The assumption that an older woman couldn't possibly choose radical self-acceptance, that her happiness must be pathological. David, she said carefully, I don't need professional help. I need my family to accept that I'm not the same person I was 2 weeks ago. I need them to understand that I'm not going to apologize for taking up space anymore. Mom, you're scaring me. This isn't like you. No, she agreed. It's not. And that's exactly the point. She hung up before he could respond, her heart pounding with the audacity of it. She'd never hung up on David before, had never cut short a conversation when he still had things to say. But she'd also never felt so clear about what she wanted, so certain that she deserved to claim it. The pottery bowl sat on her counter, misshapen and beautiful. Tomorrow, she would return to class and make another one. She would buy paint and canvas and learn to create landscapes that existed only in her imagination. She would sign up for dance lessons and cooking classes, and maybe, just maybe, she would get that tattoo. The woman in the mirror smiled back at her, purple-streaked hair catching the afternoon light. She looked like someone who might cause trouble, who might make people uncomfortable, who might refuse to disappear quietly into the background of other people's lives. She looked, Isabelle realized, like someone who might finally be ready to live. The doorbell at David's house rang at exactly 6 o'clock on Sunday evening, the same time Isabelle had been arriving for family dinners for the past 5 years. But this time, when David opened the door, he took an involuntary step backward. Gone was the woman in sensible slacks and muted cardigans. In her place stood someone who looked like she'd stepped out of a bohemian art gallery, flowing paisley dress in deep purples and greens, handmade jewelry that caught the light as she moved, and those purple-streaked silver locks now styled in loose waves that framed her face like a crown. "Hello, David," Isabelle said, holding up a bottle of wine she'd never have dared bring before, a bold red with a label featuring a woman dancing under the stars. "I brought something to go with dinner." David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Behind him, Lisa appeared, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock to something that might have been admiration before settling on diplomatic concern. "Isabelle," Lisa said carefully, "you look different." "Thank you," Isabelle replied, stepping into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. "I feel different too." The sound of running feet announced Sophie's arrival. The 10-year-old skidded to a stop in the hallway, her eyes wide with delight. "Grandma, you look like a rainbow." Sophie threw her arms around Isabelle's waist, burying her face in the flowing fabric of the dress. "I love your hair. It's so pretty." "Thank you, sweetheart," Isabelle said, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "I thought it was time for a change." Emma appeared next, drawn by the commotion. Her face lit up when she saw her grandmother, and she let out a small gasp of appreciation. "Grandma, you look amazing! Where did you get that dress?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "A little boutique in downtown Palo Alto," Isabelle said, spinning slightly to show off the dress's dramatic sleeves. "The owner said it was designed by a local artist. I thought it was time I started supporting local creativity." David finally found his voice. "Mom, what is this?" "This is me." Isabelle said simply. The real me. I've been hiding her for a long time, but I've decided she deserves to see the world. Lisa stepped forward, ever the diplomat. Why don't we go into the living room? Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. The family gathered in the meticulously decorated space, with its cream-colored furniture and carefully curated coffee table books. Isabelle's vibrant presence seemed to transform the room, making it feel suddenly sterile and lifeless by comparison. So, David said, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining normalcy. How have you been, Mom? Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned you've been busy. I've been wonderful, Isabelle said, settling into the pristine white armchair that she'd always been afraid to touch. I started taking pottery classes. Look. She pulled out her phone, another recent purchase that had scandalized Mrs. Rodriguez, and showed them photos of her latest creations. The bowls and vases were clearly the work of a beginner, but they pulsed with character and joy. These are really good, Grandma, Emma said, studying the photos with genuine interest. I love how organic they look, like they grew instead of being made. That's exactly what I was going for, Isabelle said, beaming. My instructor says I have a natural feel for the clay. I never knew I had artistic inclinations. That's great, Mom, David said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but great. But don't you think you should maybe start with something more appropriate for your age, like a quilting circle or book club? The word appropriate hung in the air like a challenge. Isabelle felt the familiar sting of being managed, of being told her desires were somehow wrong or unseemly. I don't want to join a quilting circle, she said quietly. I want to make art. I want to create things that have never existed before. But Mom, pottery is so messy and expensive. Wouldn't you rather? Actually, Isabelle interrupted, I'm thinking of getting a tattoo next. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face went pale, Lisa's eyes widened, and even Sophie stopped fidgeting with her toy. A tattoo? David's voice cracked like a teenager's. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious, Isabelle said, enjoying the shock on his face more than she probably should have. I've been researching designs. I'm thinking of something with butterflies. The reference to his childhood fear was deliberate, and she watched understanding dawn in his eyes. This wasn't random rebellion. This was pointed, purposeful reclamation of her own narrative. Mom, that's completely inappropriate. You're 72 years old. So people our age don't get tattoos. People my age, Isabelle corrected, can do whatever they want. I've earned the right to make my own choices. Emma leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. What kind of butterflies, Grandma? Are you going to get them in color? Emma, don't encourage this. David snapped, then immediately looked guilty for his harsh tone. Why not? Emma shot back. If Grandma wants a tattoo, that's her choice. It's her body. Because it's... ... David struggled for words. It's not dignified. It's not how grandmothers are supposed to behave. According to who? Isabelle asked. Who made these rules about how I'm supposed to behave? Who decided that reaching a certain age means I have to become invisible? Lisa, who had been silent through the exchange, finally spoke. David, maybe we should... No, David said, standing abruptly. This has gone far enough. Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't you. This dramatic hair, these clothes, talking about tattoos. It's like you're having some kind of breakdown. I'm not having a breakdown, Isabelle said calmly. I'm having a breakthrough. It's the same thing. No, it's not. Isabelle stood too, her paisley dress swirling around her. A breakdown is when you fall apart. A breakthrough is when you break through the walls that have been keeping you prisoner. Prisoner? David's voice rose. Mom, you've never been a prisoner. You've been respected, dignified. I've been erased, Isabelle said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her. I've been edited and managed and made palatable for everyone else's comfort. I've been so busy being the grandmother you wanted me to be that I forgot who I actually am." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Sophie had moved closer to Isabelle, taking her hand in a gesture of simple support. "I like the new you, Grandma," Sophie said quietly. "You seem happier." "I am happier, sweetheart," Isabelle replied, squeezing her granddaughter's hand. "I'm the happiest I've been in years." Lisa cleared her throat. "Maybe we should eat dinner while it's still warm. We can talk about this more calmly." "There's nothing to talk about," David said, his voice tight with control. "This is embarrassing, Mom. You're embarrassing the family." The words hit the air like a physical blow. There it was again, that word that had started this whole transformation. But this time, instead of retreating, Isabelle felt something powerful rise within her. "Embarrassing," she repeated slowly. "Yes, I suppose I am. I'm embarrassing because I refuse to disappear quietly. I'm embarrassing because I want to create art and express myself, and maybe even fall in love again." "Fall in love?" David's voice went up an octave. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about living, David. Actually living instead of just existing. I'm talking about refusing to become a comfortable, convenient grandmother who sits quietly in the corner and doesn't make waves." Emma stood up, her young face flushed with emotion. "Dad, why can't you just be happy for her? She's doing things she enjoys. She's being creative." "Emma, you don't understand the complexities." "I understand perfectly," Emma interrupted. "You're ashamed of Grandma because she doesn't fit your idea of what an old person should be. But that's your problem, not hers." "Emma, go to your room," David said sharply. "No," Emma replied, crossing her arms. "I'm 16 years old, and I'm part of this family. I have a right to speak." "You have a right to respect your elders and not interfere in adult conversations." "Respect?" Emma laughed bitterly. "Like the respect you're showing Grandma right now?" Lisa stepped between them, her diplomatic instincts kicking in. "Everyone, please. Let's just take a breath and—" "There's nothing to breathe about," David said. "Mom, I'm going to be very clear. This behavior needs to stop. The hair, the clothes, the pottery classes, all of it. You're making a spectacle of yourself." Isabelle looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw a man consumed by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of losing control, fear of anything that threatened his carefully constructed image of success and respectability. "David," she said gently, "I understand that you're scared. But I'm not going to stop living my life because it makes you uncomfortable. This isn't living, Mom. This is acting out like a teenager." "Maybe," Isabelle said. "That's because I never got to be a teenager. I came to this country when I was 22, married at 24, widowed at 31 with a 2-year-old son. I've been responsible and practical and appropriate my entire life. And now I'm done." She moved toward the door, her decision made. "Thank you for dinner, Lisa, but I think I should go." "Mom, wait," David said, his voice softening slightly. "Don't leave like this. We can work this out." "Work what out?" Isabelle asked, turning back to face him. "You want me to go back to being invisible so you can be more comfortable. But I can't do that anymore." "I won't." Sophie ran to her, wrapping her arms around Isabelle's waist. "Don't go, Grandma. I like your rainbow dress." "I have to go, sweetheart," Isabelle said, kissing the top of Sophie's head. "But I'll see you soon. Maybe we can make some art together." "I'd like that," Sophie said, shooting a defiant look at her father. Emma approached next, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Grandma, I think you're brave. I think you're amazing." "Thank you, honey," Isabelle said, hugging her granddaughter tightly. "Remember that it's never too late to be who you really are." Lisa walked her to the door, her expression troubled. "Isabelle, I want you to know that. I think what you're doing is wonderful. Scary, but wonderful." "Thank you, Lisa. That means more than you know." As Isabelle walked to her car, She could hear raised voices from inside the house. David's anger, Emma's passionate defense, Lisa's attempts at mediation. The family she'd tried so hard to hold together was fracturing, and she was the cause. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel guilty about it. She felt free. The drive home took her through the familiar streets of Palo Alto, past the houses where she'd once felt like an outsider looking in. Now she realized she'd been an outsider in her own life, trying to fit into a story that was never hers to begin with. Back in her apartment, she changed into comfortable clothes and sat at her kitchen table with the list she'd been adding to all week. Things I want to do before I die. She picked up her pen and added a new item. Stop caring what David thinks. Then she crossed it out and wrote instead, help David learn to stop caring what everyone else thinks. Because maybe, just maybe, if she could show him how to live authentically, he might remember the little boy who'd been brave enough to study butterflies until he conquered his fear of them. The boy who'd understood that some things were worth facing, even when they scared you. Especially when they scared you. The knock on Isabelle's door came at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, tentative and rhythmic, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slower ones. It was Emma's secret knock, the one she'd used since she was 8 years old, and wanted to surprise her grandmother with drawings or stories she'd written. Isabelle opened the door to find her 16-year-old granddaughter standing in the hallway, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Shouldn't you be in school? Isabelle asked, though she stepped aside to let Emma in. I have a free period, Emma said, which they both knew was probably a lie. I wanted to see your apartment. Dad said you've been redecorating. The word carried air quotes around it, and Isabelle smiled despite herself. David had always been diplomatic in his disapproval, couching his criticism in terms that sounded reasonable to outside ears. I have, Isabelle said, gesturing around the space that had been transformed over the past month. What do you think? Emma stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide with amazement. The apartment that had once been decorated in safe beiges and muted blues now pulsed with color and life. Vibrant artwork covered the walls, some pieces Isabelle had bought from local artists, others her own experimental paintings. The windows were hung with glass prisms that scattered rainbows across the walls when the sun hit them just right. Plants and hand-painted pots crowded every surface, creating a jungle of green against the colorful backdrop. Grandma, Emma breathed. This is incredible. It's like stepping into a different world. It is a different world, Isabelle said, leading Emma into the living room where her easel stood by the window, a half-finished landscape waiting for attention. It's the world I've been hiding inside myself for 72 years. Emma moved through the space like she was in a museum, examining each piece with the careful attention of someone who understood art. She paused at a small watercolor of a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, painted in bold purples and golds. Did you paint this last week? Isabelle said, joining her granddaughter in front of the painting. It's not very good, technically, but I like what it represents. It's beautiful, Emma said softly, and it's definitely good. Look at how you captured the light on the wings. They stood together in comfortable silence, grandmother and granddaughter connected by something deeper than blood, a shared understanding of what it meant to create, to bring something into the world that had never existed before. Emma, Isabelle said finally, why are you really here? Emma's shoulders sagged, and suddenly she looked much younger than her 16 years. I had a fight with Dad. About college applications. Ah. Isabelle guided her to the couch, which was now covered in a throw she'd woven herself in pottery class. Another skill she'd discovered she possessed. What kind of fight? The same kind we always have, Emma said, sinking into the cushions. He wants me to apply to Stanford, Berkeley, all the UC schools. Pre-med track, obviously. But I don't want to be a doctor. What do you want to be? Emma looked up at her grandmother with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. I want to be an artist. I want to go to art school, maybe study illustration or graphic design. I want to make things that matter, things that make people feel something. That sounds wonderful, Isabelle said, and meant it. Why doesn't your father support that? Because it's not practical, Emma said, her voice taking on a bitter edge. Because artists don't make money. Because I need to have a real career, something respectable, something that won't embarrass the family. The last words hung in the air between them, heavy with shared understanding. Isabelle reached over and took her granddaughter's hand. Emma, can I tell you something your father doesn't know? Emma nodded, leaning closer. When I was your age, I wanted to be a fashion designer. I used to sketch dresses and dream about seeing my creations on runways in Paris. I was actually quite good at it. I had a natural eye for color and line. What happened? Life happened, Isabelle said simply. I got married, had your father, became a widow. I needed to survive, to provide for my family. So I became a seamstress instead of a designer. I spent 40 years making other people's visions come to life, while my own stayed locked away. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't know. Don't be sorry, Isabelle said firmly. Be determined. Be brave enough to choose differently than I did. But what if Dad's right? What if I can't make a living as an artist? What if you can? Isabelle countered. What if you're brilliant at it? What if you create something that changes the world? What if you spend your whole life wondering, what if? Because you were too afraid to try. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He says I'm being selfish, that I owe it to the family to make something of myself. Making art is making something of yourself, Isabelle said. Creating beauty, expressing truth, touching people's hearts. That's not selfish. That's essential. She stood and walked to a drawer, pulling out a folder thick with papers. Emma, I want to show you something. Inside the folder were dozens of sketches, dress designs from decades past, drawn on whatever paper had been available. Napkins, the backs of envelopes, scraps of fabric. Each sketch was dated, and Emma could see the progression of years, the evolution of style, the persistence of a dream that had never quite died. You kept them all, Emma whispered, studying a particularly elegant evening gown design dated just 2 years ago. I couldn't throw them away, Isabelle admitted, even when I convinced myself it was too late, that I was too old, that it was impractical. I couldn't let them go. These are amazing, Emma said, flipping through the sketches. This one looks like something you'd see at Fashion Week. Maybe someday I'll try to make it, Isabelle said. But right now I want to focus on you. On making sure you don't spend the next 50 years hiding your dreams in a drawer. Emma looked up at her grandmother with something approaching awe. You've really changed, haven't you? I've really become myself, Isabelle corrected. And you know what? It's terrifying and exhilarating and the best thing I've ever done. Dad thinks you're having a breakdown. Your father thinks anything that threatens his sense of control is a breakdown, Isabelle said gently. He's scared, Emma. He's scared of change, scared of judgment, scared of not being perfect. Sometimes I feel sorry for him, Emma said quietly. It must be exhausting, caring so much about what everyone thinks. It is, Isabelle agreed. I know because I did it for most of my life. But you don't have to. You can choose differently. They spent the next hour looking through art books Isabelle had bought, discussing color theory and composition, sharing dreams and fears. Emma showed her grandmother photos of her own artwork on her phone, digital illustrations that pulsed with talent and creativity. These are extraordinary, Isabelle said, zooming in on a piece that depicted a woman breaking free from chains made of conformity. You have to pursue this. You have to. What if I'm not good enough? What if you are? Emma smiled, the first genuine smile Isabelle had seen from her in months. Grandma, can I ask you something? Anything. Would you come with me to look at art schools? I know I can't apply without Dad's support, but I want to see what's out there. I want to dream a little. Isabelle felt her heart swell with pride and possibility. I would love that. But Emma, you need to know, if I help you with this, your father is going to be furious. He might cut me off completely. I know, Emma said, her voice steady with determination. but I can't live my life to avoid his disapproval. You've taught me that. When do you want to go? Saturday? There's an open house at the California College of the Arts in Oakland. I've been wanting to visit for months. It's a date, Isabelle said, then paused. Actually, speaking of dates. Emma's eyes lit up with curiosity. What kind of dates? Well, Isabelle said, feeling suddenly shy. I've been thinking about what you said, about how it's my body and my choice. And I realized that extends to more than just tattoos and purple hair. Grandma, are you talking about dating? Maybe, Isabelle said, her cheeks flushing. I mean, I'm only 72. That's not dead, right? Emma laughed, a sound of pure delight. Right! Oh my God, that's amazing! Have you met someone? Not yet, Isabelle admitted. But I've been thinking about it. And I realized I have no idea how modern dating works. I was married for almost 30 years, and I've been alone for over 40. The world has changed a lot. Online dating, Emma said immediately. That's how everyone meets now. You create a profile, post some photos, write about yourself, and then you can browse through potential matches. That sounds terrifying, Isabelle said. It is, a little, Emma agreed. But it's also exciting. You get to decide exactly how you want to present yourself. You get to be completely honest about who you are and what you want. Would you help me set up a profile? Emma's face broke into a grin. Are you kidding? I would love to help you. This is going to be so much fun. They spent the next 2 hours crafting Isabelle's dating profile, Emma serving as photographer and advisor, while Isabelle discovered she actually enjoyed talking about herself, her interests, her dreams, her newly awakened sense of adventure. Okay, Emma said, reviewing the final product. Profile says you're 72, recently retired, new to the area and looking for adventure. You love art, pottery, trying new things, and you're not interested in playing it safe. The photos show you in your purple streaked hair, painting at your easel, and holding one of your pottery pieces. Do I look appropriate? Isabelle asked, then immediately laughed at herself. I can't believe I just said that. You look like yourself, Emma said firmly, and yourself is amazing. As Emma prepared to leave, she'd have to hurry to make it back for her afternoon classes. She turned to her grandmother with a serious expression. Grandma, I need to ask you something. What is it? Are you sure you're ready for this? All of this? Dad's going to be so angry when he finds out about the art school visit. And if you start dating... Isabelle considered the question seriously. Was she ready for David's anger? For the family conflict that would inevitably follow? Was she ready to be seen as the troublemaker? The one who disrupted their carefully maintained peace? Emma, she said finally, I spent 50 years being ready for everyone else's comfort. I think it's time to be ready for my own happiness. Emma hugged her tightly. I love you, Grandma, the real you. I love you too, sweetheart. And I'm so proud of the woman you're becoming. After Emma left, Isabelle sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, staring at the dating profile they'd created together. With a deep breath, she clicked publish and watched as her authentic self was released into the world. Within minutes, she had her first message. The revolution, it seemed, was just beginning. The pottery studio buzzed with quiet concentration every Thursday morning. The sound of wheels spinning and clay being shaped mixing with soft conversations and the occasional laugh. Isabelle had been coming for 6 weeks now, and she'd begun to recognize the rhythm of the place, the way Sarah, the instructor, moved between students with gentle guidance, the particular grunt of satisfaction when someone finally centered their clay properly, the collective sigh when a piece collapsed despite everyone's best efforts. She was working on a vase today, something more ambitious than her usual bowls. The clay responded to her touch differently now, more willingly, as if it recognized her hands and trusted her intentions. She'd been surprised by how quickly she'd developed what Sarah called clay memory, the ability to feel what the clay needed, to sense when it was ready to be shaped, or when it needed to rest. That's looking beautiful, Isabelle, Sarah said, pausing beside her wheel. You've really found your rhythm. I think the clay is finally forgiving me for all my early mistakes, Isabelle replied, her hands steady as she drew the walls of the vase higher. Or maybe you're finally forgiving yourself for being human, Sarah said with a knowing smile before moving on to the next student. The comment lingered in Isabelle's mind as she worked, forgiving herself for being human. For decades, she'd held herself to impossible standards, trying to be the perfect immigrant, the perfect mother, the perfect widow. She'd apologized for taking up space, for having needs, for being anything other than grateful and unobtrusive. The vase was nearly complete when she heard laughter from the station next to hers. She glanced over to see a man about her age struggling with what appeared to be his first attempt at pottery. His wheel was spinning too fast, clay flying in all directions, and he was laughing at the chaos he'd created. "I think I'm supposed to be making a bowl," he said to no one in particular, "but this looks more like abstract expressionism." Isabelle smiled despite herself. "Your clay has artistic ambitions." He looked over at her, and she was struck by his eyes, warm brown with laugh lines that spoke of a life well lived. "I'm Jake Morrison," he said, attempting to slow his wheel with one muddy hand. "And I'm clearly out of my depth here. Isabelle Wilson. And, trust me, we've all been there. Last week, I created what I generously called a deconstructed teacup." "That sounds much more sophisticated than, quote, complete disaster," Jake replied, finally managing to stop his wheel. "Mind if I ask, how many classes does it take before you stop feeling like you're wrestling with the clay?" "I'll let you know when I get there," Isabelle said, adding a subtle curve to her vase's lip. "But I think the wrestling is part of the fun." Jake wiped his hands on his apron, a motion that sent clay splattering across his shirt, and really looked at her for the first time. She was aware of his gaze, taking in her purple-streaked hair, her paint-stained fingers, the confidence with which she handled her clay. "You don't look like you're wrestling," he observed. "You look like you're dancing." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "I've only been coming for 6 weeks. Before that, I'd never touched clay in my life." "Really? You're a natural." He gestured to his own clay-covered workspace. "I'm a retired high school art teacher, and I can barely manage to keep the clay on the wheel." "What did you teach?" "Drawing, painting, sculpture?" "Everything except pottery, apparently." His smile was self-deprecating, but not bitter. "I always told my students that art was about embracing imperfection, about finding beauty in the unexpected. I'm finally learning to take my own advice." There was something in his tone that suggested deeper meaning, and Isabelle found herself curious about his story. "What brought you to pottery?" Jake's hands stilled on his clay. "My wife died 8 months ago. Cancer. She always wanted me to try pottery, said it would be good for my hands after all those years of detailed drawing. I kept putting it off, saying I'd try it when I retired, when I had more time." "I'm sorry for your loss," Isabelle said quietly. "Thank you. Margaret was. She was everything good about my life. And when she was gone, I realized I'd been putting off a lot of things. Pottery, travel, making new friends. Living, really." The honesty in his voice resonated with something deep in Isabelle's chest. "I understand that feeling. I've spent most of my life putting things off too. What changed for you?" Isabelle considered the question as she added finishing touches to her vase. How could she explain the moment when she'd decided to stop being invisible? How could she describe the liberation of finally disappointing people's expectations? "I realized I was disappearing," she said finally. "Bit by bit, year by year, I was becoming smaller and quieter and more forgettable. And I decided I'd rather be embarrassing than invisible." Jake's laugh was surprised and delighted. "Embarrassing? You? I can't imagine that." "Oh, I am," Isabelle said with pride. "I've scandalized my family, worried my neighbors, and generally made myself a person of interest in my very respectable retirement community. It's been wonderful." "Tell me more about this scandalous behavior," Jake said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. So she did. As they worked, Jake gradually gaining control over his clay while Isabelle put the finishing touches on her vase. She told him about the purple hair, the art classes, the dating profile Emma had helped her create. She told him about David's horror at her transformation, about the family dinner that had ended in argument, about the way she'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. "You dyed your hair purple to spite your son?" Jake asked, grinning. "I dyed my hair purple because I wanted to see what I looked like in purple," Isabelle corrected. "The fact that it spite him was just a bonus." "I love that," Jake said. "Margaret would have loved that too." She always said the best revenge against people who try to make you smaller is to become magnificently, unapologetically yourself. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She also would have loved your vase. The way you shaped it, the confidence in your hands, it's beautiful. Isabelle looked at her creation with fresh eyes. It was beautiful, she realized. Not perfect, but beautiful in its slight asymmetry, its organic curves, its evidence of human hands shaping something from nothing. "Thank you," she said, then impulsively added, "Would you like to get coffee after class? I promise to tell you more embarrassing stories about my late-in-life rebellion." Jake's face lit up. "I would love that. And I'll tell you about the time I convinced 30 high school students that Jackson Pollock was a master of controlled chaos, then proceeded to splatter paint all over the principal's car." After class, they walked to a small cafe near the community center. Jake had managed to create something that vaguely resembled a bowl by the end of the session, and he carried it carefully wrapped in newspaper like a precious artifact. "First successful pottery experience," he explained when Isabelle raised an eyebrow. "I'm going to put it on my mantle." "Next to your teaching awards?" "Next to my collection of coffee mugs with inspirational quotes," he said seriously. "I have 17 of them. All gifts from students who thought I needed more inspiration in my life." The cafe was busy with the lunch crowd, but they found a quiet corner table where they could talk without shouting. Jake ordered black coffee and a sandwich that looked like it could feed a small family. Isabelle chose tea and a salad, though she found herself stealing glances at his enormous sandwich. "Go ahead," he said, catching her looking. "Ask." "Ask what?" "Ask how someone who's been a high school teacher for 35 years can still eat like a teenager." Isabelle laughed. "I was wondering, actually, though I was trying to be polite about it. One of the benefits of retiring," Jake said, taking a massive bite, "I can finally eat lunch without 17 students asking me questions, requesting bathroom passes, or staging dramatic scenes about their love lives." "Do you miss it? Teaching?" Jake considered the question while chewing. "I miss the kids. I miss the moment when a student suddenly understands perspective or color theory. I miss being needed. But I don't miss the bureaucracy, the testing, the way art got pushed to the margins of everything else." "What are you doing with your time now?" "Learning pottery, apparently. And badly." He gestured to his wrapped bowl. "I've been taking some photography classes too, trying to see the world through different eyes." "That's wonderful. I've been thinking about photography myself." "You should try it. There's something magical about capturing a moment, preserving it forever." He paused, studying her face. "Though I have to say, you seem like someone who's more interested in creating new moments than preserving old ones." The observation was more perceptive than she'd expected. "You're right. I spent so many years living in the past or worrying about the future that I forgot how to exist in the present. And now? Now I'm making up for lost time." She stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Jake, can I ask you something personal? After you've told me about your scandalous dating profile, I think we're past the point of worrying about personal questions. How do you do it? How do you start over after losing someone who was such a huge part of your life?" Jake's expression grew serious. "Honestly, some days I don't know. There are mornings when I wake up and for just a moment, I forget she's gone. I reach for her side of the bed, or I save up stories to tell her, or I buy her favorite flowers out of habit." "That must be painful." "It is, but it's also precious somehow. Those moments when love is stronger than memory, when the habit of loving someone survives even their absence." Isabelle felt tears prick her eyes. "I was widowed young. My husband died when David was only 2. I always thought I'd remarry eventually, but I was so focused on surviving, on providing for my son, that I never made space for love again." "It's not too late," Jake said gently. "Love doesn't have expiration dates." "That's what I'm hoping, though I have to admit, the thought of dating at 72 is terrifying." "Why?" The question was simple, but it forced Isabelle to examine her assumptions. "Because I'm old. Because I'm set in my ways. Because I don't know how to flirt or date or be attractive to someone new." "Isabelle," Jake said, leaning forward slightly, Can I tell you something? She nodded. You've been flirting with me for the past 2 hours. You've been charming and funny and completely captivating. You've told me about your art, your rebellion, your dreams. You've been exactly as attractive as any woman I've ever met. The words hit her like a gentle shock. I have? You have. And if you don't mind me saying so, any man who gets to know you and doesn't find you absolutely fascinating is an idiot. Isabelle felt heat rise in her cheeks. Thank you. Don't thank me for stating the obvious. Jake glanced at his watch. I hate to cut this short, but I have a doctor's appointment in 20 minutes. But I was wondering, would you like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere with smaller sandwiches and more conversation? I would love that, Isabelle said, surprised by how quickly the words came. Saturday night? There's a little Italian place downtown that has amazing pasta and terrible lighting, which is perfect for first dates between people who've forgotten how to do this. Saturday night sounds perfect. As they prepared to leave, Jake carefully rewrapped his pottery bowl. You know, Isabelle, I came to that class today thinking I was going to learn how to make a simple bowl. Instead, I met someone who's teaching me something much more valuable. What's that? That it's possible to reinvent yourself at any age. That courage doesn't get old. That there's beauty in refusing to become invisible. Walking to her car, Isabelle felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Anticipation. Not the anxiety of waiting for something to go wrong, but the delicious expectation of possibility. She had a date. At 72, she had a date with a man who found her fascinating. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How did the pottery class go? Any cute guys? Isabelle smiled as she typed back. Actually, yes. His name is Jake and he's taking me to dinner Saturday night. The response came immediately. OMG, Grandma! I'm so proud of you. Details, please. As she drove home, Isabelle caught herself humming, something she hadn't done in years. Through her rearview mirror, she could see the community center where she'd learned to shape clay, where she'd met someone who saw her as more than just a grandmother or a widow or an embarrassment. She was becoming someone new, someone who took up space and made noise and expected to be seen. Someone who could laugh at her mistakes and create beauty from chaos and maybe, just maybe, fall in love again. The revolution was accelerating, and she was ready for whatever came next. The candles on Isabelle's dining table flickered in the gentle breeze from her open window, casting dancing shadows across the colorful artwork that now covered her walls. She'd spent the afternoon preparing for Jake's visit. Not the frantic cleaning she once would have done, but a joyful arrangement of her space to welcome someone new into her world. Jake had arrived at 6 with a bottle of wine and a small potted orchid, his eyes lighting up as he took in the transformation of her apartment. This is incredible, he'd said, studying her paintings with genuine appreciation. You've created something magical here. Now, 2 hours later, they sat over the remains of the simple pasta dinner she'd made, talking with the easy comfort of people who'd discovered an unexpected connection. Jake had told her about his years teaching, about the students who'd changed his life as much as he'd changed theirs. She'd shared stories of her early years in America, of learning English through soap operas, and raising David alone while working 2 jobs. You know, Jake said, reaching across the table to touch her hand, I haven't felt this, alive in months. There's something about you, Isabelle. Something that makes me remember who I used to be before I got so careful. Careful? She turned her hand palm up, letting their fingers intertwine. You don't seem careful to me. Oh, but I am. Was. After Margaret died, I became so afraid of making mistakes, of doing the wrong thing that I stopped doing much of anything. You make me want to take risks again. Quote. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Isabelle felt her heart beating faster, a sensation she'd almost forgotten was possible. When had she last felt this flutter of anticipation, this awareness of another person's proximity? Jake, she began, then stopped as the sound of a key turning in her lock echoed through the apartment. They both froze. Only one person had a key to her apartment, and he never used it without calling first. "Mom?" David's voice called from the entryway. "Are you okay? You didn't answer your phone, and I was worried." He appeared in the doorway to the dining room and stopped dead, his eyes taking in the scene before him. The intimate dinner setting, the wine glasses, the way Isabelle's hand was still entwined with Jake's across the table. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally, horror. I'm sorry," he stammered, but his tone suggested he was anything but sorry. "I didn't realize you had company." Isabelle felt Jake's hand tighten around hers, a gesture of support that gave her strength. "David, this is Jake Morrison." "Jake, my son David." Jake stood, extending his free hand in greeting. "It's nice to meet you, David. Your mother has told me so much about you." David stared at the outstretched hand but didn't take it. "Mom, can I speak with you? Privately?" "Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Jake," Isabelle replied calmly, though her heart was racing. "He's my friend." "Your friend?" David's voice cracked slightly. "Mom, what is this? What's happening here?" "We're having dinner," Isabelle said simply. "Jake and I met at pottery class." "Pottery class?" David repeated, as if the words were foreign. "And you're dating?" The word came out like an accusation, and Isabelle felt a familiar flash of anger. "Yes, David, I'm dating. Is that such a shocking concept?" "Yes, it is!" David exploded, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "You're 72 years old, Mom. You don't date. You don't do this." Jake stood slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Perhaps I should go," he said quietly to Isabelle. "Give you and your son some privacy." "No," Isabelle said firmly, standing as well. "You don't need to go anywhere. David, you need to calm down and remember your manners." "My manners?" David's voice rose another octave. "You're worried about my manners? You're sitting here having a romantic dinner with a complete stranger, and you're worried about manners?" "Jake isn't a stranger," Isabelle said, moving to stand beside him. "He's a wonderful man who treats me with respect and kindness, something you seem to have forgotten how to do." "Respect?" David laughed bitterly. "Mom, this is embarrassing." "You're embarrassing yourself, embarrassing our family. First the hair, then the clothes, now this. What's next? Are you going to start clubbing? Dating apps? Moving in with random men?" "I'm already on dating apps," Isabelle said with deliberate calm. "Emma helped me set up my profile." The color drained from David's face. "Emma? You involved Emma in this breakdown?" "It's not a breakdown," Isabelle snapped. "It's a breakthrough. It's me finally living my life instead of just existing in the margins of yours." Jake cleared his throat softly. "I think I really should go," he said, looking between mother and son. "This is clearly a family matter." "Don't you dare leave," Isabelle said, turning to face him. "You have every right to be here. We're adults, we're friends, and we're doing nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong?" David's voice was shrill now. "Mom, you barely know this man. He could be anyone. He could be taking advantage of you, preying on your condition." "My condition?" Isabelle's voice was dangerously quiet. "What condition is that, David?" "Your age, your obvious mental state. Mom, normal people don't just completely change their entire personality overnight. Normal people don't start acting like teenagers when they're in their 70s. Jake stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "David, I understand you're concerned about your mother, but you're being incredibly disrespectful. Isabelle is a remarkable woman who's finally allowing herself to live authentically. That's not mental illness. That's courage. Don't you dare tell me about my mother," David snarled, pointing at Jake. "You don't know anything about her. You don't know what she's been through, what she's sacrificed. You don't know anything about our family. You're right, Jake said evenly. I don't know your family history. But I know your mother is intelligent, creative, and vibrant. I know she deserves to be happy. And I know she doesn't deserve to be treated like a child who can't make her own decisions. She's not thinking clearly, David insisted, his voice breaking slightly. This isn't her. She's been a widow for 40 years. She doesn't date, she doesn't paint, she doesn't dye her hair purple. She's quiet and dignified and appropriate. She's sitting right here, Isabelle said sharply, and she's tired of being talked about like she's not in the room. David, I need you to listen to me very carefully. She moved to the center of the room, placing herself between her son and Jake. I have been quiet and dignified and appropriate for 72 years. I have been what everyone needed me to be, what everyone expected me to be. I have made myself smaller and quieter and more invisible year after year, until I almost disappeared entirely. That's not true, David protested weakly. It is true, Isabelle said firmly. And I'm done. I'm done being embarrassed about who I am. I'm done apologizing for taking up space. I'm done living my life according to other people's expectations. But what about the family? What about our reputation? What will people think? I don't care what people think, Isabelle said, the words ringing with finality. I care about what I think. I care about what makes me happy. And Jake makes me happy. Art makes me happy. Color makes me happy. Living makes me happy. David's face crumpled, and suddenly he looked much younger than his 50 years. Mom, please, I'm scared. I'm scared you're going to get hurt. I'm scared you're going to make mistakes. I'm scared. I'm scared I'm losing you. The raw fear in his voice pierced through Isabelle's anger, and she felt her heart soften slightly. Oh, David, you're not losing me. You're meeting me. The real me. For the first time in your life, you're meeting your mother instead of the woman I thought you needed me to be. I need you to be my mother, David said desperately. I need you to be normal. I am being your mother, Isabelle said gently. I'm being the mother who raised you to be independent and strong and unafraid of challenges. I'm being the mother who taught you that love is worth fighting for, that dreams are worth pursuing, that fear is not a reason to stop living. She paused, looking at this man who was her son, this person she'd sacrificed everything for, who now couldn't bear to see her happy. David, I'm asking you to trust me. Trust that I'm smart enough to make good decisions. Trust that I deserve companionship and joy and love. Trust that I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a breakthrough. David stood in silence for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions. Finally he spoke, his voice flat and final. I can't do this, Mom. I can't watch you destroy everything you've built, everything you've been. If you continue down this path, if you keep this up, I don't think I can be part of it. The words hit Isabelle like a physical blow. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you choose this, the dating, the inappropriate behavior, the embarrassment, then you're choosing not to be part of our family. Emma and Sophie don't need to see their grandmother acting like this. Lisa doesn't need the stress of wondering what you're going to do next. You're giving me an ultimatum, Isabelle said slowly. You're asking me to choose between my family and my happiness. I'm asking you to choose between your family and your midlife crisis. It's not a midlife crisis, David, it's my life. Just my life. Finally. David headed toward the door, then turned back one last time. When you come to your senses, when you realize what you're throwing away, call me. Until then, I think we need some space. The door slammed behind him, leaving Isabelle and Jake standing in the sudden silence of the apartment. The candle still flickered on the table, the wine still sat half-finished, but the magic of the evening had been shattered. Isabelle sank into her chair, her hands shaking slightly. I'm sorry, she whispered to Jake. I'm so sorry you had to witness that. Jake sat beside her, taking her hands in his. You don't need to apologize. You handled that with incredible grace. Did I? Isabelle looked up at him, tears threatening. I may have just lost my son. You stood up for yourself, Jake said firmly. You refuse to be controlled by fear. That takes tremendous courage. It doesn't feel courageous, Isabelle admitted. It feels terrifying. The best things usually do, Jake said softly. And Isabelle? I want you to know that I'm honored to be here with you. Honored to be part of your breakthrough, your journey to authenticity. Whatever happens next, don't let his fear stop you from becoming who you're meant to be. Looking into his kind eyes, Isabelle felt some of her strength return. She had made her choice, and despite the cost, she knew it was the right one. She was finally, fully, authentically alive. The silence in David's house was thick with tension, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at Isabelle's apartment, and the family seemed to be holding its collective breath, waiting for someone to break first. Lisa sat at the kitchen island, her laptop open to a job search website she'd been staring at for 20 minutes, without reading a single posting. The cursor blinked in the search bar, waiting for her to type something, anything, that might give direction to the restless energy that had been building inside her since that night. "Are you okay?" Emma asked, sliding onto the stool beside her mother. "You've been staring at that screen forever." Lisa closed the laptop with a decisive snap. "I'm thinking about going back to work." "Really?" Emma's voice carried a mix of surprise and excitement. "What kind of work?" "I don't know yet," Lisa admitted. "I haven't worked in 16 years. I'm not even sure what I'm qualified for anymore." "You're qualified for lots of things," Emma said firmly. "You basically run this household like a Fortune 500 company. You could do anything." Lisa smiled at her daughter's confidence, but the smile faded as she heard David's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face set in the same grim expression he'd worn for 3 days. "Any coffee left?" he asked, without looking at either of them. "In the pot," Lisa replied, watching as he moved through the kitchen like a ghost. "David, we need to talk." "About what?" "About your mother, about what happened, about the fact that you've been sulking around this house like a teenager for 3 days. David's jaw tightened. "I'm not sulking. I'm processing the fact that my mother has lost her mind." "She hasn't lost her mind," Emma said sharply. "She's found herself." "Emma, this doesn't concern you," David said, his voice carrying a warning. "It does concern me," Emma shot back, standing up to face her father. "Grandma is my family too, and I think what she's doing is brave." "Brave?" David laughed bitterly. "It's reckless. It's embarrassing. It's everything you're too scared to be," Emma interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're so worried about what everyone thinks, about maintaining your perfect image, that you can't stand the thought of anyone in this family being authentic." "Emma, that's enough," Lisa said quietly, but her daughter continued. "No, it's not enough. Dad, you're so busy being ashamed of Grandma that you can't see how amazing she is. She's creating art, she's making friends, she's living her life. When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy?" David's face flushed red. "I'm not having this conversation with a 16-year-old. "Why not?" "Because I might be right. Because you don't understand the complexities of adult life. You don't understand reputation and responsibility, and I understand that you're choosing fear over love," Emma said, her voice breaking. "And I understand that if you keep this up, you're going to lose her." She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving her parents in stunned silence. Lisa heard Emma's bedroom door slam upstairs, followed by the sound of her daughter's sobs. "I should go talk to her," Lisa said, starting to rise. "Leave her alone," David said wearily. "She's just going through a phase. She'll understand when she's older." "Will she?" Lisa asked, settling back onto her stool. "Or will she learn that love comes with conditions? That family acceptance depends on conformity?" David stared at his wife, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "Are you taking their side?" "I'm not taking sides," Lisa said carefully. "I'm trying to understand what's happening to our family. What's happening is that my mother is having a breakdown, and instead of supporting me, you're all encouraging her delusions." Lisa was quiet for a long moment, studying her husband's face. She saw the fear there, The desperate need for control, the way he'd constructed his entire identity around being the perfect son, the perfect husband, the perfect executive. "David," she said slowly, "when was the last time you were truly happy?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean genuinely happy. Not satisfied, not successful, not in control. Happy. I don't know. I'm content. I'm grateful for what we have." "That's not what I asked." David sat down heavily across from her, suddenly looking older than his 50 years. "I don't have time to think about happiness. I have responsibilities. I have a family to provide for, a career to maintain, a reputation to uphold. But when was the last time you laughed, really laughed? When was the last time you did something spontaneous, something just for the joy of it? Those are luxuries I can't afford. Why not?" The simple question hung in the air between them. Lisa watched her husband struggle with it, saw the way he seemed to be grappling with something fundamental about himself. "Because," he said finally, "if I stop being perfect, if I let my guard down, everything will fall apart." "Everything like what?" "Everything like this." He gestured around the pristine kitchen, at the life they'd built together. "My job, our house, our family. If I'm not constantly managing, constantly controlling, it will all disappear." Lisa felt her heart break for him. "David, do you think I would leave you if you weren't perfect?" "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "Maybe. Everyone else does." "What do you mean?" "My mother did. She's choosing some stranger over her own family. She's choosing her rebellion over everything I've given her." Lisa saw it then. The little boy who'd been left by his father's death, who'd watched his mother work herself to the bone, who'd learned that love was conditional and safety was temporary. "She's not choosing Jake over you," Lisa said gently. "She's choosing herself. For the first time in her life, she's choosing to be happy. At the expense of everyone else's comfort." "Maybe everyone else's comfort was built on her discomfort," Lisa said. "Maybe we all got used to her being invisible because it was easier for us." David's face crumpled slightly. "I just want things to go back to the way they were." "Do you? Really? Because the way things were, your mother was disappearing. She was becoming smaller and quieter every year. Is that really what you want?" Before David could answer, the doorbell rang. Lisa went to answer it, returning with Mrs. Rodriguez, who looked unusually agitated. "I'm sorry to bother you," Mrs. Rodriguez said, wringing her hands. "But I need to talk to someone about Isabelle. I'm worried about her." "What's wrong?" David asked, immediately alert. She's changing even more. Yesterday, I saw her coming home from somewhere, and she looked so different. Not just her hair and clothes, but her whole presence. She looked confident, happy." Mrs. Rodriguez said the last word like it was a symptom of illness. "I don't understand," Lisa said. "That sounds like a good thing." "It is and it isn't," Mrs. Rodriguez replied. "The thing is, seeing her like that, it's making me question everything. My own life, my own choices. I've been a widow for 8 years, and I've been so careful, so proper. But watching Isabelle, it's like she's holding up a mirror, and I don't like what I see." She sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. "Yesterday I did something I haven't done in decades. I bought a red dress. Not burgundy, not maroon. Red. Bright, bold, look at me red." Lisa smiled. "That sounds wonderful." "It felt wonderful," Mrs. Rodriguez admitted. "Terrifying, but wonderful. And then I started thinking about other things I've been too scared to do, like the dance classes at the community center. I've wanted to try them for years, but I kept telling myself I was too old, too set in my ways." "You should try them," Lisa said. "I did," Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly. "This morning, I signed up for ballroom dancing lessons." David looked between the two women with growing alarm. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Mom's behavior it's contagious. It's making everyone act irrationally." "Is it irrational to want to be happy?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. "Is it irrational to refuse to become invisible?" It's irrational to throw away everything you've built for some fantasy of reinvention, David said sharply. Mrs. Rodriguez studied him for a moment. David, can I ask you something? Are you angry at your mother for changing, or are you angry at yourself for being afraid to change? The question hit him like a physical blow. I'm not afraid. You're terrified, Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. You're terrified that if you let go of control, if you stop being perfect, you'll lose everything you think defines you. But what if you're wrong? What if the things that truly matter, love, family, happiness, what if those things don't require perfection? Lisa watched her husband's face as Mrs. Rodriguez spoke, saw the way her words seemed to cut through his defenses. For a moment, she glimpsed the man she'd married, the one who'd been spontaneous and funny and unafraid of making mistakes. I don't know how to be anything else, David said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Then maybe, Mrs. Rodriguez said, it's time to learn. Later that evening, after Mrs. Rodriguez had left and David had retreated to his study, Lisa found herself standing in front of her closet, staring at the rows of carefully coordinated outfits. Professional clothes from a career she'd abandoned, casual clothes that screamed suburban mom, formal wear for the endless social obligations that came with David's position. She pulled out a dress she'd bought years ago but never worn, a flowing, artistic piece in deep blues and greens that had made her feel beautiful in the store but had seemed too bold for her actual life. She held it up to herself in the mirror, trying to imagine wearing it, trying to imagine being the woman who would choose such a dress. Her phone buzzed with a text from Isabelle. Thinking of you. Hope you're okay. Lisa stared at the message, then impulsively typed back, Can we have coffee tomorrow? I need to talk to someone who understands. The response came immediately. Of course. I'll bring Jake. You'll love him. And Lisa? Thank you for defending me that night. It meant everything. Lisa smiled, feeling something shift inside her chest. She hung the dress in the front of her closet where she could see it every day. A reminder that she had choices, that she could be more than just the perfect wife and mother. In her room, Emma was on the phone with her friend Sarah, talking about the art school visit she and Isabelle had planned for the weekend. I can't believe she's actually going with me, Emma said. It's like having a co-conspirator instead of just a grandmother. Are you going to apply? Sarah asked. I want to, Emma said. I'm scared about what Dad will say, but I want to try. Grandma says fear isn't a reason to stop living. Your grandma sounds amazing. She is, Emma said, looking at the sketch she'd been working on, a portrait of Isabelle in her purple-streaked hair, painting at her easel. She's the bravest person I know. Meanwhile, David sat in his study, staring at a photo on his desk. Him and his mother at his college graduation, both of them beaming with pride. He looked young in the photo, unguarded, genuinely happy. When had he stopped looking like that? When had he learned to be afraid of his own joy? He picked up his phone several times, started to dial his mother's number, then stopped. What would he say? How could he bridge the gap between who he'd become and who he wanted to be? Outside, the night was full of possibilities. Isabelle was probably painting, or talking with Jake, or planning her next adventure. Mrs. Rodriguez was probably trying on her red dress, preparing for dance classes. Emma was dreaming of art school, of a future where she could be authentically herself. And Lisa was slowly, carefully, beginning to remember who she'd been before she'd learned to be invisible. The revolution was spreading, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time. The only question was whether David would find the strength to join them, or whether he would remain trapped in his prison of perfection, watching through the bars as everyone else learned to fly. The waiting room at Dr. Patricia Williams's office was designed to be calming. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, watercolor paintings of peaceful landscapes. But the tension radiating from the Chen family as they sat in a loose circle was anything but peaceful. Lisa had scheduled the appointment 3 days ago, after finding David crying in his study at 2 a.m, staring at old photo albums. I don't know why I'm here, David said for the 3rd time, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. This is a family matter. We don't need outside intervention. We tried handling it as a family, Lisa replied quietly. It didn't work out so well. Emma sat between her parents, her sketchbook clutched in her lap like a shield. She'd been drawing constantly since the confrontation at Isabelle's apartment. Angry, beautiful sketches of caged birds breaking free, of women dancing in bright colors, of families torn apart by fear. "Where's Grandma?" she asked, checking her phone for the time. "She said she'd be here." "She's coming," Lisa said, though she wasn't entirely sure. Isabelle had agreed to the session, but she'd sounded hesitant on the phone. "She's bringing Jake." "Jake?" David's voice cracked. "She's bringing him to family therapy?" "He's part of her life now," Lisa said firmly. "And this is about her life, her choices." The waiting room door opened, and Dr. Williams appeared, a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair that she wore in a loose bun. She surveyed the family with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen this dynamic many times before. "I'm Dr. Williams," she said, extending her hand to each of them in turn. "I understand we're waiting for 2 more people." "My mother and her friend," David said, the word coming out like it tasted bitter. "Her boyfriend," Emma corrected, earning a sharp look from her father. 5 minutes later, Isabelle arrived with Jake, both of them looking slightly apprehensive but determined. Isabelle wore a flowing dress in jewel tones, her purple-streaked hair styled in loose waves. Jake, in a casual blazer and jeans, carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. "Sorry we're late," Isabelle said, kissing Emma's forehead and nodding to Lisa. Her eyes met David's briefly, and Lisa saw the hurt there, carefully masked but still visible. Dr. Williams led them into her office, a larger space with a circle of chairs arranged to encourage conversation. As they settled in, Lisa noticed how the group naturally divided. David sat alone on one side, while Isabelle, Jake, and Emma gravitated toward the other. She found herself in the middle, literally and figuratively. "Before we begin," Dr. Williams said, "I want to establish some ground rules. This is a safe space where everyone's feelings are valid. We're not here to judge or blame, but to understand and communicate. Everyone will have a chance to speak, and everyone will be heard." She looked around the circle, making eye contact with each person. "David, Lisa tells me you requested this session because you're concerned about changes in your mother's behavior. Would you like to start by sharing those concerns?" David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Yes. My mother has been acting completely out of character for the past few months. She's changed her appearance, her lifestyle, her social circle. It's not normal behavior for someone her age." "What do you mean by normal?" Dr. Williams asked gently. "I mean appropriate. Dignified. She's 72 years old, and she's acting like a teenager. The purple hair, the art classes, the dating." He couldn't quite bring himself to look at Jake. "I see. And how does this make you feel?" "Embarrassed," David said immediately. "Worried. Like I'm watching my mother have some kind of breakdown." "Isabelle," Dr. Williams turned to her, "how do you respond to what David just said?" Isabelle was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was steady but sad. "I'm sorry that my happiness embarrasses you, David, but I'm not sorry for being happy. This isn't happiness, Mom. This is rebellion. This is acting out." "Against what?" Isabelle asked. "Against a life that made me invisible? Against expectations that required me to shrink myself until I almost disappeared?" "You weren't invisible," David protested. "You were respected. You were dignified." "I was erased," Isabelle said quietly. "Bit by bit, year by year, I made myself smaller to fit other people's comfort zones. I spent 50 years being appropriate, David. Appropriate for a widow, appropriate for a mother, appropriate for a grandmother. I forgot that I was also a woman with dreams and desires and the right to take up space." Dr. Williams nodded encouragingly. "Tell us about those dreams, Isabelle." "I wanted to be a fashion designer when I was young," Isabelle said, her voice growing stronger. "I had sketches, ideas, real talent. But life got in the way. Marriage, widowhood, raising David alone. I told myself I could pursue it later, when there was time, when it was practical. But later never came. And now?" Dr. Williams prompted. Now I'm making art. I'm creating things with my hands, expressing myself in ways I never allowed myself to before. I'm dating a wonderful man who sees me as more than just a caretaker or a burden. She glanced at Jake, who smiled encouragingly. I'm living, not just existing. At what cost? David demanded, his composure finally cracking. At the cost of your family's respect? At the cost of your dignity? At the cost of everything you've built? What have I built, David? Isabelle asked, her voice rising slightly. What exactly am I throwing away? A life where I was so careful, so quiet, so accommodating, that my own son was embarrassed by my presence at his daughter's birthday party? The words hung in the air like a challenge. David's face went pale, and Lisa saw the moment when he realized his mother had heard everything. Mom, No, Isabelle said firmly. You were embarrassed by me before I changed anything. You were embarrassed by my stories, my background, my lack of sophistication. So I decided if I was going to be embarrassing anyway, I might as well be embarrassing while doing things that make me happy. Emma leaned forward in her chair. Can I say something? Dr. Williams nodded. Of course, Emma. I think what Grandma is doing is incredible, Emma said, her voice trembling with emotion. She's showing me that it's never too late to be yourself. That you don't have to live your whole life according to other people's expectations. Emma, you don't understand, David began. I understand perfectly, Emma interrupted. I understand that you're so worried about what other people think that you can't see how amazing your own mother is. I understand that you're trying to control everyone else's life because you're afraid of living your own. That's not true, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Emma asked. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to? When was the last time you took a risk, made a mistake, showed any spontaneity at all? David looked stricken. I have responsibilities. So does Grandma, Emma said. But she's figured out how to be responsible and authentic at the same time. Dr. Williams intervened gently. David, I'm curious about something. You mentioned being embarrassed by your mother's behavior. Can you tell us more about that feeling? David was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched in his lap. I've worked very hard to build a certain reputation. In my career, in my community. I need people to respect me, to see me as competent and reliable. And you feel your mother's behavior threatens that? Yes, people judge you by your family. If my mother is seen as eccentric or inappropriate, it reflects on me. I see. And what would happen if people's opinion of you changed? David's face went through a series of expressions. Fear, confusion, vulnerability. I don't know. I've spent my whole life being what other people expected me to be. That must be exhausting, Dr. Williams said softly. It is, David admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm so tired of being perfect. So tired of managing everyone's expectations. But I don't know how to be anything else. Lisa reached over and took his hand. You don't have to be perfect, David. I didn't marry you because you were perfect. I married you because you were kind and funny and passionate about things that mattered to you. When was the last time you felt passionate about something? Dr. Williams asked. David considered the question, his brow furrowed. I don't remember. I used to love programming, creating something from nothing. But somewhere along the way, it became about advancement, about image, about being seen as successful. What if success wasn't about other people's approval? Isabelle asked gently. What if it was about being true to yourself? I don't know who that is anymore, David said, and for the first time in the session, he looked directly at his mother. I don't know who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else wants me to be. That's okay, Isabelle said. I didn't know who I was either. I'm still figuring it out. But David, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I finally realized that I have a choice. I can spend the rest of my life being invisible, or I can be vibrantly, authentically myself. Even if it means losing your family? David asked, his voice breaking. I'm not losing my family, Isabelle said firmly. I'm finding out which family members love me for who I am, And which ones only love me when I'm convenient? The words hit David like a physical blow. He doubled over slightly, his shoulders shaking. I do love you, Mom. I'm scared. I'm scared of change. Scared of not being in control. Scared of what people will think. I know, Isabelle said, her voice full of compassion. But David, you can't live your life in fear. You can't make everyone else live their lives in fear either. Jake, who had been silent throughout most of the session, finally spoke. David, I know you don't know me, and I know you're not happy about my relationship with your mother. But I want you to know that I see her clearly, not as a burden, not as an embarrassment, but as a remarkable woman who's finally allowing herself to shine. She's always been remarkable, David said quietly. Then why couldn't you see it? Emma asked, not unkindly. Why did it take her changing everything for you to remember? David looked around the circle at his family. His wife, who was quietly pursuing her own journey of self-discovery. His daughter, who was fighting for her right to be authentic. His mother, who was blazing a trail of courage he was too frightened to follow. Because, he said finally, I was too busy being afraid to pay attention to what was right in front of me. Dr. Williams leaned forward slightly. David, what would it look like if you stopped being afraid? What would your life look like if you stopped trying to control everything and everyone? I don't know, David admitted. But maybe it's time to find out. The session ended with no dramatic reconciliation, no sudden resolution. But something had shifted. A crack in the wall David had built around himself, a moment of vulnerability that let in the light. As they left the office, Isabelle approached her son. David, I want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you. But I can't go back to being invisible. I won't. I know, David said, his voice hoarse from emotion, and I need to figure out how to be okay with that. Take your time, Isabelle said, squeezing his hand. But don't take too long. Life is shorter than we think, and happiness is more precious than approval. As they walked to their separate cars, each family member carried with them a new understanding, that love without authenticity was just another form of hiding, and that the courage to be real was the greatest gift they could give each other. The real work, they all knew, was just beginning. 3 months after the therapy session, the morning light filtered through the windows of Isabelle's apartment, illuminating canvases stacked against the walls and pottery pieces displayed on every available surface. She stood at her easel, adding finishing touches to a painting of the Golden Gate Bridge, rendered in bold, impossible colors: purple fog, emerald water, a sky that shifted from rose to gold. That's going to be beautiful in the gallery, Jake said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. They'd been practically inseparable since the family confrontation, their relationship deepening with each shared sunrise, each quiet evening spent creating together. I still can't believe Patricia convinced me to display my work, Isabelle said, leaning back against his chest. 6 months ago, I would have said I wasn't good enough. 6 months ago, you wouldn't have tried, Jake pointed out, pressing a kiss to her temple. That's the difference between then and now. You're finally willing to be seen. The phone rang, interrupting their morning ritual. Isabelle glanced at the caller ID and smiled. It's Lisa. Isabelle, I'm calling with news. Lisa's voice bubbled with excitement. I got the job. The marketing position at the nonprofit? Isabelle asked, gesturing for Jake to come closer so he could hear. Yes, they want me to start next week. Part-time at first, but with the possibility of full-time if I want it. Lisa's voice carried a confidence that had been missing for years. I'm terrified and exhilarated at the same time. That's wonderful, dear. How does David feel about it? There was a pause. He's adjusting. He's still in individual therapy, trying to work through his control issues. But he actually said he was proud of me yesterday. That was unexpected. People can change, Isabelle said gently. Look at us. Speaking of change, Lisa said, are you ready for Sophie's birthday party this afternoon? She's been planning it for weeks. Wouldn't miss it, Isabelle replied. Jake's coming too, if that's all right. Of course it's all right. David specifically asked me to invite him. He said he wanted to, and I quote, Try to be the kind of person who doesn't judge people before getting to know them. After hanging up, Isabelle and Jake made their way to the community center for her pottery class. The Thursday morning group had become like family, a collection of people who'd found courage in clay and each other. Mrs. Rodriguez was already there, her hair now styled in a sleek silver bob that made her look years younger. "Isabelle," Mrs. Rodriguez called out, gesturing to the man beside her. "I want you to meet Antonio. He's my dance partner." The man was distinguished and warm, with kind eyes and a ready smile. "Carmen has told me so much about you," he said, taking Isabelle's hand. "Thank you for showing her it's never too late to live boldly." "I didn't show her anything," Isabelle replied. "She had the courage all along. She just needed permission to use it." As they worked on their pottery, Mrs. Rodriguez shared her latest adventure. "We're going to compete in a ballroom dancing competition next month. Can you believe it? Me, competing at 73. "I can absolutely believe it," Isabelle said, watching her friend's face light up as she spoke about dancing. "You're glowing, Carmen." "I feel like I'm glowing," Mrs. Rodriguez admitted. "For the first time in years, I feel alive. Really alive." After class, Isabelle and Jake drove to David's house for Sophie's 10th birthday party. The decorations were different this time, less Pinterest perfect, more exuberant. Balloons in every color covered the backyard, and a banner made by Emma proclaimed, "Happy birthday, Sophie," in bold, artistic letters. Sophie ran to greet them, her face painted with butterflies and her hair adorned with flowers. "Grandma, I love your dress," she squealed, throwing her arms around Isabelle's waist. "Thank you, sweetheart," Isabelle said, spinning in the flowing, paint-splattered dress she'd worn to create art. "I thought it was appropriate for a party." David appeared, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him in months. His hair was slightly mussed, his shirt had a small stain from party preparations, and he was smiling, genuinely smiling. "Mom," he said, approaching cautiously. "I'm glad you came." "I'm glad you invited me," Isabelle replied. "Both of us." David extended his hand to Jake. "I owe you an apology," he said. I was rude. And wrong. I'd like to start over if you're willing." Jake shook his hand firmly. "I'd like that very much." The party was a revelation. David played games with the children, getting grass stains on his knees, and laughing when he lost at musical chairs. Lisa moved through the crowd with new confidence, her recent job offer having restored something essential in her bearing. Emma had set up a face painting station and was creating elaborate designs on delighted children. "Dad, can I show everyone my art portfolio?" Emma asked during a quiet moment. David hesitated for just a second before nodding. "Of course. I'd like to see it too." Emma's presentation was stunning. A collection of digital art, traditional paintings, and mixed media pieces that showed remarkable talent and vision. The adults gathered around, offering genuine praise and encouragement. "These are extraordinary, Emma," Jake said, studying a piece that depicted a family of different colored butterflies emerging from identical cocoons. "You have a real gift." "Thank you," Emma said, then looked at her father. "Dad, I applied to art school. To California College of the Arts. I know you wanted me to focus on pre-med, but—" "I'm proud of you," David interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you for pursuing your dreams." "I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Really? Really? And I want to help however I can." Later in the afternoon, as the party wound down, Isabelle found herself in the kitchen with Lisa, helping with cleanup. "He's different," Lisa observed, watching David through the window as he helped children retrieve balloons from the trees. "Therapy is helping," Isabelle replied. "But I think the real change is that he's finally allowing himself to be imperfect." "It's terrifying and liberating at the same time," Lisa said. "I never realized how much energy I was spending trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother. Now that I'm going back to work, I feel like I'm remembering who I used to be." "You're becoming who you were always meant to be," Isabelle corrected. "Just like all of us." As the sun began to set, the family gathered around the table for cake. Sophie made a wish and blew out her candles, and in the golden light of the evening, Isabelle looked around at the faces of the people she loved most. David was different. More present, more authentic. Lisa glowed with newfound purpose. Emma radiated the confidence that came from feeling truly seen and supported. And Sophie, beautiful Sophie, was surrounded by adults who were finally modeling what it meant to live courageously. "Grandma," Sophie said, climbing onto Isabelle's lap, "I love your purple hair." "Thank you, sweetheart," Isabelle said, hugging her granddaughter close. "Will you teach me to paint like you?" "I would love that," Isabelle replied, catching Jake's eye across the table. "We could start with butterflies." As the evening wound down, the family made plans for future gatherings. Emma's art show, Lisa's first day of work, Mrs. Rodriguez's dance competition. They were building new traditions, creating space for authenticity and joy. The revolution was complete. But the real work, the daily choice to live authentically, to love without conditions, to embrace imperfection, was just beginning. And for the first time in her 73 years, Isabelle Wilson was exactly where she belonged. 1 year later, the backyard of Isabelle's new apartment, a larger space she'd moved to with Jake, buzzed with celebration. Her 73rd birthday party was unlike any gathering the family had ever hosted. Canvases lined the fence, displaying her paintings alongside Jake's sculptures and Emma's digital art. The tables groaned under Lisa's catering. She'd started her own business after leaving the nonprofit, specializing in events that celebrated authentic living. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, raising his glass, his voice steady and warm. "A year ago, I thought my mother was having a breakdown. Today, I realized she was having a breakthrough, and she brought all of us with her." The crowd laughed, and Isabelle felt tears prick her eyes. This was the son she'd raised, the one who'd studied butterflies until he conquered his fear. "Mom, you taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's living authentically despite it. You showed us that it's never too late to become who we're meant to be." Emma stood next, her acceptance letter to art school framed and displayed prominently. "Grandma, you didn't just change your life, you gave me permission to claim mine." Lisa stepped forward, confident in her success as an entrepreneur. "You showed me that being invisible isn't the same as being dignified." Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with Antonio, both of them wearing their ballroom dancing medals. "And you taught me that 73 is just the beginning of a new chapter." Jake moved to Isabelle's side, pulling out a small velvet box. "Isabelle Wilson, you've shown me that love doesn't have age limits. Will you marry me?" Through her tears, Isabelle saw her family. Not the perfect, controlled unit David had tried to maintain, but a real family, messy and authentic and beautifully imperfect. Sophie was painting at her easel, David was laughing with cake frosting on his shirt, and everyone was exactly who they were meant to be. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "Yes to everything." The celebration continued late into the night, filled with art and laughter and the kind of joy that comes from living without apology. Isabelle had finally learned the secret she'd spent 73 years seeking. True dignity comes not from conformity, but from the courage to be magnificently, authentically yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,